Is that what it?
No.
Yeah, refer to it?
Mm-hmm.
I could say according to our records, something like that.
Okay, we're rolling, so anytime you're ready.
Okay. The last day of trial in Courtroom 1 was March 1st of 2002, at which time we conducted pre-trials. The attorneys there were told that they were part of the history of the courtroom now, and it would be worthwhile preserving for the record their names. They were Edward F. Liston, John F. Russo, Stephen Seacare, Thomas Butz, John Woodland, Howard Butensky, Anthony Mancuso, and we had a pro se litigant, David Lipton, also appear. The following Monday and Tuesday, the courtroom was dark. And on Wednesday and Thursday of that week, the 6th and 7th, we did have an additional event in the courtroom when 2 grand juries were selected. And with those selections, we ended the use of Courtroom 1 as we have now seen it. Over the weekend, the courtroom was eerie, empty, since we had moved out all of the furniture and the furnishings being prepared for the contractors to arrive on March 8th. And in fact, they did come in on March 8th and started the destruction of the courtroom and, of course, the renovation to follow. The first thing that they undertook was the removal of the chairs in the courtroom.
I'm ready, Judge.
On March 11th, the contractor started the demolition work. It's kind of a date of irony since it was also 6 months. On March 11th of 2002, the contractors started the demolition work. The date is significant as being the 6-month anniversary of the demolition, the destruction of the trade towers in New York. So we started our own demolition, but this one being for a very good purpose, and the upcoming restoration of the courtroom. The first work to be done was the removal of the chairs which were in Courtroom 1. Those chairs were placed there in 1929 after the pews were destroyed by fire, and they have remained there in that position. They're interesting in that they depict the period. Each of the chairs has a hat rack underneath them. They are laminated construction in a vertical position, each piece in a vertical position, laminated together. And we hope that they're going to be available for people as historical mementos of Courtroom 1. Let's go take a look at it. As you can see, there are approximately 185 chairs here that are now been taken down or been loosened from their place. Under the chairs, or if you can get to Mr. Cameraman, is the hat rack that was used in that day. No self-respecting gentleman would enter a courtroom during that period without a hat. And as we can see, the back is laminated pieces of wood which have held together now for over 70 years. Unfortunately, the chairs are all bolted together so that as we take them apart, we will lose some chairs. And there is a side piece of the chair sitting on top of our chairs. The outer portion of each row contains an inscription from Ocean County, and then the inside pieces, of course, are not inscribed. They're bolted through here to the next chair. Perhaps we can try to get a look at the inscription.
maybe the stuff would say something.
You can move.
The next order of business was the removal of the judge's bench, which I believe was placed here after the renovation in the early 1950s when the judge's chambers was created in the Grecian Bend area, which is in back of me. At that time, or before that time, the bench had been located within the Grecian Bend. In the 1950 construction, I believe that they elevated the platform and brought this bench, new bench forward into the courtroom. The bench was built in honor of Major Leon Burry, who at that time was the longest sitting judge in Ocean County. He's now been replaced by Judge William Huber. We are going to preserve the bench in one means or another, either through the Burry family or by utilization of the bench in our new library facility, which is going to be located on the first floor of the historic courthouse. The next order of business was the removal of the flooring, and we were able, after the removal of the flooring, to determine what the original flooring was here in the courtroom. We had assumed it would be a wide board flooring, but as we'll see in a minute, in fact was a rather narrow flooring, which we have exposed in several areas. Now that's a narrow one, and we'll see it better in jury.
Okay. That'll be good because I can cut to that. And now I'm back on you. Okay.
All right, so let's go into the Grecian Bend area, which is the first area of actual removal of walls. And as you can see, this is live at the cabinet with all the noise that attended to that. Let's go up through the judge's robing room. You want to go up there?
Yeah.
Oh, then I better say, let's go up. I don't think he wants to come in that way. We're going to have to go that way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, ready?
Yeah, just say it again. What you just said, but just do it again and start the wall.
All right. So let's go up through the judge's robing room into the Grecian Bend.
Okay.
Okay?
Just come on up and walk.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that was when they did the renovation.
Now, without interfering too much with the work that Gene's doing here, we'll take a look at some of the things that have been disclosed by virtue of the room being demolished. One of the early discoveries was the scrolling, which I had assumed was here, but had never been able to visually see very closely. And as you can see, this scrolling appears to have been a hand-done painting as opposed to a stenciling, and I believe continued throughout the courtroom, and perhaps we will find as the walls start to come down in the courtroom. This also demonstrates what was the color of the walls as we had assumed. It was a tan. Of course, this has aged quite a bit over the period. I believe it was a good deal lighter than this in the early days. This effect on the wall is apparently some painting. The next project was removal of the bench, which was previously located on the platforms behind me. This bench was built, we believe, sometime before the 1950s in honor of Major Leon Burry, who at one time was the longest sitting judge in Ocean County. He's now been supplanted by Judge William Huber. And as you see, the bench contains a plaque dedicated in his honor. The bench was reconstructed, I believe, at the time that the Grecian Bend was closed in because the bench used to sit back in the Grecian Bend. It was brought forward and placed on a three-step platform in front of the wall that was then used to enclose the judges' chambers. We are looking now to preserve this bench in some way, either by its transfer to relatives of the deceased judge, or perhaps to utilize it in the library as a reception desk in the law library. Now, the next project they started on was in the Grecian Bend, and perhaps we should go into there now. This room that I'm entering now is adjacent to the Grecian Bend and was built 20 years after it, and it was known as the judge's robing room for an obvious reason. The judge used this as a small office in an area where he would then enter the Grecian Bend, which is to my left. Grecian Bend, by the way, obtained its name from the popular bustle of that period because of its rounded shape. One of the first disclosures here in the Grecian Bend was the scrolling that we thought was applied to the walls when the room was constructed in 1870. It appears that this scrolling is not stenciling, but rather a hand design. And it's placed on the plaster, which was painted in a tan, which is what we expected. We really did not have definitive proof of the color of the walls, but now we have it, and we know that the tan was somewhat lighter than this, and it has aged over the year and darkened substantially. We also discovered that the wall separating the Grecian Bend from the courtroom was done in a fashion which would suggest strongly that it was constructed around 1950, that is. We have never had definitive proof of that as well. It's a three-layer construction preceding the sheetrock, which became popular thereafter. The wall here was obviously painted at some point in time, probably after the Grecian Bend was altered. We found in the process of removing the rug that, in fact, the floor in the Grecian Bend had been elevated approximately a foot. And once we remove this portion of this flooring, which will occur, we'll be able to see more clearly that elevation. So at one point in time, the Grecian Bend was actually lower, and we can also see that from the fact that this chair rail is obviously not as high as it would be in a normal height. Underneath the chair rail is an interesting and yet unexplained effect, looking sort of a marbleized effect, which before the floor was raised must have been the wainscoting or some effect of that type utilized in the room. And it is on both sides of the room here and on the other side as well. We also have now exposed the dome ceiling in the Grecian Bend, and in a very short period of time we will be able to see that from outside of the bend more clearly than we can now, because the remaining portions of the front and of course the studding will be removed in just a day or two. And at that time we'll be able to get the true effect that existed back in 1870. The doorway here was just about the area in which the bench was located, and will be relocated upon construction, so that the bench will extend approximately 6 inches beyond this partition, but most of the bench will be located within the bend area. The bench will cover approximately 13.5 feet of this open area and would be suitable even to accommodate several judges. We're hoping to have the appellate division sit here in session over several times during a year. The window, which is behind us now and is being used as a disposal area presently, will be blanked out, and because it did not exist in the 1870 edition of the courthouse, so that this entire window will be removed and bricked over so that it will appear that it was never there. I think we'll cut it there, don't we? We want to get the original flooring in somehow, huh? but we don't really see it there yet, so I guess we should.
Tape is rolling, so any 4, 3,
It's Tuesday, March 26, 2002, and we are in the jury room of the Courtroom 1, and we can now see that substantial work has been done in here. We have removed most of the bathrooms and the closet, which is behind me. The bathrooms show us that they were probably constructed, and we believe they were constructed in the 1929 restoration of the courtroom, as is best demonstrated by the wall board that is remaining on the studs at this point. That was the construction that was used throughout the courtroom during 1929. Also, interestingly, we have disclosed the fact that there was a door here leading from the jury room into the Grecian bench. That door was shown on the plan of restoration, which we have discovered dated January of 1930, and was also shown on the 1954 plan, which covered a proposed alteration at that time. In 54, they did not disclose that the door was going to be closed and boarded over, but apparently they decided to do it as part of the renovation then or shortly thereafter. You can tell that the construction of it is in keeping with the wall that was placed on the Grecian bend as it faces the courtroom. So we now know that there was a door from both sides of the Grecian bend into the Grecian bend. There's been substantial other work done out in the courtroom, which has revealed other items of interest, and perhaps we should go out there.
Okay, in 5, 4, 3.
As you can see, the courtroom now is pretty much bare. We have removed all of the chairs that were in the spectator area, and the judge's bench has been removed, and we are storing it presently downstairs and expect to use it as a reception desk in our new law library. As we removed the material from this area and also some of the flooring, we discovered a confirmation of the 1954 plan, which showed a railing approximately 6 feet or so, perhaps a little bit less from the original rail, and that is shown by a line along the floor here that has the exact configuration shown on the 1954 plan. In addition, of course, we've started to remove the ceiling, and a substantial portion of the ceiling has now come down. In the far corner of the courtroom, we discovered the stenciling or scrolling that has been referred to extensively in the plans, both and also as well in the writings that we have found concerning the restoration of the courtroom.
We are rolling, and 5, 4, 3.
All right, now we can see that they have started to remove the plaster columns which are around the courtroom and the baskets which lay at the top of the columns. We've never gotten a definitive name for those baskets. We think maybe they were attempting to copy the old Corinthian baskets. You can see that they were actually just plastered right into the wall. They are a single molded unit, solid, and we'll take a look at one shortly. But the reconstruction will mean taking all of this plaster off. You can see it's solid plaster. And in this particular spot, we actually see the outside wall of the courthouse itself. We haven't had a chance yet to see what's down in there, and we'll have to think more about what this means in terms of how the construction was originally done. But it is quite visible right at this spot.
Three.
We've also discovered...
and 3.
We've also discovered some of the original tin...
Judge, do it one more time, please.
Okay.
3.
We've also discovered some of the original tin molding, part of the original tin roof, is still remaining up under the drop ceiling, and you can just see it protruding through the scaffolding up there. We have a piece down now, and we'll take a look at that along with the basket, which we've also removed.
Three.
And this is a piece of that molding that we saw up at the ceiling level. When I practiced law here, this was throughout the ceiling, so that there was a stamped or pressed metal ceiling, which was eventually covered up by the acoustical tile. They left some of this when they did that work. You can see the back of it, just a simple piece of almost tin-like molding. And down below here, we have a full basket which was removed from the column, which we just saw. It is a heavy, solid piece of plaster. And in the back, it is quite full of horsehair or some other fabric holding it together. And there's a lot of weight in it. Apparently, it was held in place, in addition to being plastered into the wall. It was held in place by 2 large nails that you can see protruding through the back there. We've also removed all of the sconces from the wall. Unfortunately, they're pretty dirty, but we hope to reuse these down in the hallway underneath Courtroom 1 in the area formerly occupied by the Law Division, and hopefully in the future by the library. And in addition, we've removed one of the 2 large chandeliers, which we have here also in good need of some cleaning. Both the chandeliers and the sconces were contributed by the Ocean County Bar Association back around 1985 and have graced the courtroom since that time. The future destination of the chandeliers we're not sure of right now.
Get some editing time in the back. And I guess we'll pick it up the next...
Yeah, they say they should have that wall out by the end of the week.
That's going to be pretty breathtaking, I think.
Yeah.
When they get that wall out,
Yeah.
if they can get that skeleton of a suspended ceiling out, so you can actually get the whole dome treatment there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let me just get down. 10, 9, 8.
All right, this is 1 month to the day when we started.
It was. We started because the first thing you were talking about the anniversary of the
Yeah.
World Trade Centers. Okay, and 5, 4, 3,
It's now April 11th, about 1 month to the date when the work in the courtroom started. And as we'll see in a minute, there's a substantial progress being made. The courtroom is now a shell and very dusty, and we're taking precautions not to breathe too much of it. The most dramatic change since last we looked at it was the work that has been done on our ceiling. We've now stripped off several layers of the ceiling almost entirely through the courtroom. The drop ceiling, of course, has been removed. Above that is the acoustical tile, and above that is the original ceiling. And we have preserved some pieces of the original ceiling with the scrolling on it that was there originally in 1870. As we've gone up, we've also been able to find additional pieces of the tin ceiling that was there at some time after the plaster ceiling was placed, probably after the fire in 1929, sometime between then and the acoustical ceiling being placed on the ceiling. The ceiling also demonstrates what we thought we would find, and that is 4 boxed out areas which reflect the places where the chandeliers were located in the original courtroom, and where we're going to place chandeliers in the reconstruction. We also see a great deal of fire damage, particularly on the north wall of the room, and we see char beams against which are paired more modern beams, those which were meant to replace or reinforce the charred beams. Most of the roofing is also charred, and from down here it's difficult to tell whether that was a singeing or was something beyond that. As it proceeds to the south of towards the south wall of the building, the charring becomes less. We have also removed most of the columns and most of the arches which were placed in the building when it was renovated back in the 50s. And we have been able to discover and look at some of the actual construction of the building, the outside wall of the building, the interior walls of the building, and see the construction that was used back then. Discovered a little mystery in the wall of the building, both on the east side and west side in the first column, so to speak. This column that I'm looking at right now, a hole up there which is hollow both above and below the opening of the hole. We've yet to been able to determine what that might be. It exists both here on the east wall and on the west wall of the courtroom. The jury room now is just about stripped. The opening of the Grecian bend, as we've seen before, is almost completely stripped, and we have decided that we're going to be replacing the opening for the door that we found when we first started the work in the jury room. We're going to put a second door in the Grecian bend, which will then make it authentic to the way that it was when it was originally constructed.
See, that's the... because I'm gonna get all the backlight in there.
What's that?
I'm getting all the backlight through the window, so it's just darkening. Let's get these guys. Like, pretend you just took a pause and now you're picking up and you're calling our attention to something else. Okay.
We've also verified that the scrolling that we saw on the window, or on the ceiling rather, has been continued in the same pattern throughout the courtroom. And right above the center of the arch, we're able to see the stenciling right at the edge of the ceiling, and then the more extensive stenciling in approximately a foot or a foot and a half from that edge stenciling. And we have seen as we remove the ceiling that it continues throughout the courtroom in that pattern. We've also seen the same stenciling around the area where the chandeliers were, and that is the area where the medallions were, and there was a circle of stenciling around the medallions. That has now been dropped as part of the ceiling has been removed, and we were unable to see stenciling in the middle of the ceiling, but that of course was covered up by the acoustical tiles. We also discovered another mystery, perhaps explainable by the fire damage that occurred in 1929, where up at the north wall, the highest point of the north wall of the building, there's a large segment of the brick that is just no longer there. Chunks of brick seem to be missing in a very random fashion, which would make one believe that it was fire damage, and that was the heaviest point of fire that occurred in 1929. So that was apparently, when they reconstructed it, left unfinished and left unrepaired, and apparently wood was put on the outside of it, which is not quite discernible from where we are standing now. With some risk, we might be able to get up and take a look at it at a later date.
got to stand on the one end there. And then just let me let it down. Watch your foot. You just got to hold it.
which was black and blue, the main body was, or one of the other one for roof.
No, it's the one that actually, see, but
For the enforcement officer to suggest different one.
Look good.
Yes, absolutely. There's no, it's not grabbing you.
You know what? You can't come too far. That's it. Well, I want to get my swing pass first.
switch.
Up close, so I'm going to move it down low.
Yeah.